Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited for another great discussion. Today we're going to be talking about the education alternatives and founder insights, and we're joined today by two amazing founders that are based in the UK. We have Alex O'Neill, who has Limitless, and also Joe Symes, who does progressive education. And I'll let them hand it over. But for any of you watching as well, we welcome you to join the Microschools Network and also check out what we have because we're working on amplifying schools and letting people all around the world know about the different kinds of school environments that we have, and we have a lot of parallel work between these two. So welcome, Alex and Joe. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us. I'm going to start off today. Alex and I have decided we're going to split it into two halves. So I'm going to do the first bit and talk a little bit about my journey exploring the world of alternatives. And then Alex is going to do the next bit, sharing some of the insights that we've learned from the membership that we run together for startup schools and learning communities. So everyone's welcome to put questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll probably take most of the questions at the end. But yes, feel free to put questions in the chat if you can't wait till the end.
Great.
So, thank you. So, I'm Jo Symes, and I'm the founder of Progressive Education, which is an organisation raising awareness of alternatives to conventional schooling and campaigns for change within mainstream education. I first got interested in the world of alternatives when I sent my own children to school about 10 years ago. And I have to confess, I didn't know anything about alternatives to school before. I sent them to school without questioning. I just followed the crowd. And so my son, age 4, went off to school. And I was looking forward to it. I was looking forward to joining the school community, making new friends, and going back to work. But I kind of knew that my son at age 4 wasn't ready. So I started him part-time initially. But within a few months, the school was putting on the pressure that he should go full-time. And very quickly, he became anxious and angry and really unhappy. And it was that classic. I don't know about where you are, but in the UK, it seems to be if you've got a child struggling with school anxiety, they'll often say, oh, well, they're fine here. Home must be the problem. And so, sure enough, I was sent off on a parenting course, and my son was sent off to the doctor and got referred to a psychiatrist and psychologist for this supposed irrational anxiety. And I found that no one was really questioning the school system itself. It was only 2 years later, when my second son went to school, that I started really questioning the system. I had a bit more time on my hands, and I started helping out at the school and saw firsthand what they were really struggling with. And they talked about things like shouty teachers and too much learning. And my youngest said, I thought it would be fun, but it's not. And when we first went to the doctor with my older son, our doctor actually had moved from a neighbouring town, and she said that she'd been blown away by the number of primary age children with mental health problems in our village. And primary over here, we're in England, is age 4 to 11. And ironically, we'd moved to this village specifically for these outstanding schools. So our English inspectorate system ranks schools, and the highest rating you can get is outstanding. And there was a high proportion of outstanding schools in this particular place where we moved to. But I think from my experience, I think the high standards, the impeccable behaviour, and striving for those top results can often have a detrimental impact on the mental health and well-being of the children. And I found that the parenting courses I was doing were kind of, the message was at odds with what I was seeing at school. They talked about empathy and listening and mutual respect and developmentally appropriate expectations. But I didn't really see that that was what the culture was like at school. And so after 2 years, at the end of 2018, we deregistered our sons from school and started exploring the world of alternatives. So at this point, my children, well, so my youngest son had just turned 5, and my older son was almost 7. And we initially started homeschooling. So in the UK, we actually call it home education. Homeschooling over here is something a little bit different. It's when the child is still on the school roll, but they're doing their schoolwork at home for some reason. Or sometimes people use the term if they're home educating, but doing it in the style of school, as opposed to unschooling, where they're learning more through life and through their own interests. And initially, we sort of started in the style of school. So we were homeschooling. We had a maths tutor and an English tutor for my older son, and I bought loads of workbooks, but it didn't particularly go very well. We had books thrown across the room, we had pencils snapped in half, and it wasn't much fun. So before long, we started more trying to sort of for the kids to learn through their own interests and passions. And at the time, that was things like Harry Potter and dinosaurs. And I now see how rich the learning is when they're allowed to learn through play. So not just life skills like communication skills and collaboration and problem solving, but the learning can often be deeper because they're intrinsically motivated. So over time, I was essentially sort of enabling my children to direct their own learning. And that's obviously known as self-directed education.
Joe, can I ask you a question? It was great.
Yes.
It was a great slide to talk about home education versus homeschooling. And is home education quite easy to enter your student into? Is this something that you have to file additional forms in the UK? Because I know it really varies state by state in the US, and everywhere around the world has different requirements regarding this.
Yeah. Well, currently it's very easy. So legally in England, it's the parent that has the legal responsibility for the education of the child, not the school or state. And I think that's been the case since the 50s. Like if you want your child to come out of school, or if you don't want them to go to school in the first place, then that's fine. If they're already in school on a roll, you have to deregister. So you have to send a formal letter to the local authority to say that you've chosen to home educate and take legal responsibility for the education. But if they've never gone to school at all, you don't actually have to do anything. But there is a new piece of legislation going through Parliament at the moment, whereby if this goes through, I think they're trying to push for you to have to ask permission of your local authority as to
Mm.
whether you can home educate or not. So it's all a bit up in the air in the moment, and we're not sure what it's going to look like. It's quite scary times actually for home educators over here.
Yeah, I've seen some of your emails detailing that. Interesting.
Yeah. So any other questions around that, or shall I continue?
You can continue. Thank you. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No, that's fine. So yeah, we were kind of doing self-directed education then through more kind of an unschooling approach. So with self-directed education, the child decides what and how they learn, and it can look a lot like play, but it also can look like formal lessons. But the point is that the child has opted in to the learning without coercion, and the role of the adult is more to facilitate rather than teach. And we were really lucky that in our neighbourhood, we had a self-directed learning community not too far from where we lived. And I was really grateful for this because that really turned things around for us. I felt that in mainstream, my children, they kind of lost their spark, but it was this learning community where their lights kind of came back on and they got their confidence back. So I really believe in the power of self-directed education. I think some people worry that if you give a child too much freedom, they'll end up opting out of everything. But that wasn't what we experienced. Like, for example, when they were at school, they were always forced to do these school plays. And they'd never get a say as to whether they got a speaking part or not, or whether they were on stage or backstage. And it always, for us, caused a lot of angst and anxiety. And I just remember a year later, once they were in this self-directed learning community, the kids decided to put on a talent show, and my boys opted into doing a dance act. I couldn't believe it. They were these dancing Santas. It was so funny. So I really believe that for some children, if they're in an environment where they're free from coercion, they'll actually learn more than if the learning was forced. So just to paint more of a picture as to what this environment was like, I just thought I would share some of the guiding principles of the settings that they were in. So it was obviously self-directed. So this particular community defined that as listening to yourself and exploring the world in the way that is meaningful to you and your own sense of curiosity and purpose. And it's about being able to choose what, when, and how you want to learn and do things based on what feels right to you. It was consent based, which means understanding your own agency and autonomy and the freedom and boundaries that come with that. So being able to say an authentic yes, no, or maybe, and respecting the boundaries and consent of others. It was ed positive, which means anything can be potentially interesting and meaningful. Curiosity, problem solving and learning doesn't have to be limited to subject silos or traditional value judgments about what is important to learn and what isn't. They had shared decision making over any decisions, but also risk management and conflict navigation. And that means that the young people have chance to influence and co-create the decisions and solutions that affect them. And the community understands and manages risks together, and conflict can be navigated in an open and honest way. And finally, they believe that people under 18 have human rights, and experiencing all that starts in the way that we're treated in childhood and the way we learn to be with and treat others in our environment. I also thought I'd share with you a little video from the setting that my kids went to. So at most democratic schools and self-directed learning communities, they tend to have a meeting, and it's a place where usually the whole school congregates either weekly or daily. And in this case, they used to have 2 meetings a day. They had an opening meeting and a closing meeting, and everyone would sit in a circle, and that was so that everyone felt equal. And it was an opportunity for the young people to be seen and heard, and to be able to contribute to how the place is run, and to be able to co-create the plan of activities. So hopefully this will play. Let's test it out.
Well, we host meetings, one in the morning and one in the afternoon.
A meeting is a circle of chairs, and everyone sits in the circle. There's a chair of the chaired circle. The chair is helping the meeting stay together. They remind everyone of the rules.
Rules of the meeting, please. Meg?
Nicholas talking.
Don't strike the chair.
Emilia.
No bananas. Yeah.
For the check-in, when everyone checks in, they can say, oh, I had a late night, I'm feeling quite tired, so that you know that they don't want to interact too much.
I'm very excited for today because it's the cabin and I'm tired. So I'm going to have a nap after this meeting.
Magic?
I'm excited. It's in 4 weeks we're going to get a puppy.
And then the hands and plans, the main part of the meeting, so we decide what we're going to do for the day and everyone can host stuff.
Stories with Jem, a talent show, favourite animal, show and competition, chair training with Sophie. So does anyone want to add anything?
Ness.
I would like to do a lip syncing lesson.
The closing meeting is very similar. You say the rules, you check out and do the plans for next week.
Next week, can we see if it was raining and go on an exercise trip? Can we make up games for next cabin?
Yeah. And then that helps us know what we're going to be doing for the day, and that's how we help choose. Yeah.
Meeting closed.
Okay.
You should have said jam.
Okay, hopefully you could hear that all right. Now, how do I make this full screen again? Hang on. There we go. Okay, so my sons used to spend 2 days a week here, and on one of the other days, they attended a forest school. So the Forest School Association defines Forest School as an inspirational process that offers children, young people and adults regular opportunities. Sorry, a sign has just popped up on my screen. Let me see if I can get rid of it. There we go. To achieve and develop confidence and self-esteem through hands-on learning experiences in a local woodland environment. I'll just share with you some of the main principles of Forest School. And now my slide's not moving on. Oh no, why is my slide moving? There we go. Technical hitch. So
Just
Forest
needed
School
a minute. Yeah.
It's a bit tired. Forest School aims to promote the holistic development of all those involved, fostering resilient, confident, independent and creative learners. Forest School offers learners the opportunity to take supported risks appropriate to the environment and to themselves, and play and choice are an integral part of the Forest School learning process. And one of the main points is that Forest School isn't just like simply learning outside every now and again. It's an ethos whereby qualified practitioners carefully facilitate long-term programs which are uniquely tailored to the needs of the individuals within the group and have the fundamental aim of building participants' self-esteem, confidence, independence, and creativity. So we did Forest School for about 3 years in combination with the self-directed learning community and a few other home education clubs and classes. But sadly, this is all just a temporary arrangement because I was under quite a bit of pressure from family members to put my kids back into school. I really didn't want them to go into mainstream. So we found that Montessori was really where we could compromise. So a lot of people tend to think that Montessori is an approach for the early years, but it's equally relevant to adolescents as it is to preschoolers. It was established by the Italian doctor Maria Montessori in the early 1900s, and she's celebrated as one of the most important educators of the 20th century. After graduating from medical school, Maria Montessori studied education and began teaching children with special educational needs, but she concluded that these special methods should actually be applied to all children. So in 1907, she founded her first school, the Children's House in Rome, and her goal for childhood was to activate the child's own natural desire to learn. I'll just share with you some of the key features of today's Montessori schools. So adults observe and guide rather than teach, enabling students to learn independently to reach their potential. The learning environment is designed to meet the needs of each child's stage of development. There's a lack of standardized tests, allowing students to work at their own pace. And mixed age groups allow students to help and be helped by others in a non-competitive environment. Children don't have to sit at desks for long periods. Instead, movement and activity are considered natural functions of childhood from which learning naturally occurs. The emphasis is on learning by doing through real-life practical activities, and there are no rewards, punishments, or criticisms. Adults lead by example and gain authority through showing children respect and courtesy. It's accepted that all students are individuals and learn in different ways at their own pace, and parent involvement is encouraged, and children are encouraged to do things for themselves to gain independence. I've just shared a few of Montessori's quotes here, and I quite like the middle one where it says, "Education is the best weapon for peace." She really wanted a new way of doing education as a path to world peace and the prevention of war. She rejected education as rote learning or academics alone and instead favoured empathy, cooperation and respect and autonomy rather than obedience. So for us, this Montessori school was sort of a success. We were able to access it on a part-time basis for about 2 years. So my kids did 3 days a week. My older son continued for another 2 years full-time. But for my younger son, it was still a little bit too schooly. So he's back to home education now. He's just recently started a new part-time project-based learning community. And we're starting to explore a few online options, which brings me on to online schooling. So online schooling became increasingly popular during COVID. Many of them are used by home educators as well as school students to supplement their learning. There's a really good guide on the School of Humanities website, and it talks about the different types of online schools. They talk about traditional versus innovative. So traditional online schools tend to replicate the mainstream model, but just deliver it online. And they follow set curricula like GCSEs, IGCSEs, A-levels, the IB, the CBSE, or the US curriculum, and they often have a rigid timetable. More innovative schools tend to favour more sort of project-based learning, and they'll find more creative ways to learn through experiences and global collaboration. And they'll often have like an interdisciplinary curriculum, and the learning might be assessed through portfolios instead of exams. So the learning can be synchronous or asynchronous. Synchronous online schools deliver live timetabled lessons and they're delivered by teachers in real time. And asynchronous online schools are completely self-paced. So the sessions are pre-recorded for learners to watch in their own time and there's no live element. And these days we're seeing more and more hybrid learning communities pop up. So that's where they're combining the online element with an in-person community. So that's kind of an overview of my experience of the world of alternatives. It's not exactly been the easiest path at times, which is why I set up my website, because I wanted to try and make it easier for other families sort of navigating their options, really. So the website is progressiveeducation.org. With hindsight, I might not have called it progressive education because I've realised that this term means different things to different people, particularly across borders. But for me, I chose it because it refers to change and transformation and looking to the future as opposed to maintaining the status quo. So for me, that's about moving away from a top-down authoritarian approach towards more kind of prioritization of autonomy and agency and student voice and choice for optimal mental health and well-being, as well as life skills like creativity, empathy, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. So the website goes through a number of different alternatives to conventional schooling, including those that I've mentioned, but also some others like Reggio Emilia and Waldorf Steiner, small schools, and world schooling. I'm about to launch an online course which will go into some of these approaches in a bit more detail. And there's a link on this slide if people want to be notified when that's ready. There's a global directory of progressive schools and learning communities and jobs and events and change maker initiatives. It's on a bit of a content freeze at the moment. It's having a bit of a revamp, and the aim mainly is that schools and learning communities will be able to upload their listings for free. So hopefully that will be up and running in the next few weeks. But again, if people want to sign up to be notified, they can follow that link on there. And finally, there's a Facebook group. So it all started really with a Facebook group, which I set up in 2019, just shortly after taking my children out of school. And that was really to try to connect with others on the same journey. And it's grown quite a bit. There's now 11,000 members. So parents, carers, educators, academics, researchers, psychologists, innovators, and change makers. And that's where I met Alex. And we have a shared passion for raising awareness of alternatives to mainstream and a shared frustration that there just aren't enough options. So not everyone has an alternative school that they can go to in their neighbourhood. So we wanted to set something up to support the startups to get off the ground. And that's what Alex is going to talk about now.
Thanks, Jo. Yes, so so my background's a little different to Jo's. I think I was really passionate about teaching and education straight out of university. So when I came out of university, honestly, I graduated in computer science, and I realised probably about halfway through my degree that I really didn't love computer science, which I think is personally a bit of a failing in my education as well, because, you know, the fact that I'd got that far and actually didn't even know what I wanted to do with my life. But anyway, that's for another day. So I started teacher training straight out of university, and just found it very difficult and very frustrating to try and teach in a mainstream school environment. So I didn't finish my teacher training course because I just didn't feel like I could do what I wanted to do, and it was also really hard work. Like it was very overloaded in terms of the amount of work I was expected to do. And so I kind of dabbled about, didn't really know sort of how to put my mark on the education space, ended up in a career of computing, basically, and IT for a while. And then I watched a TED Talk, which you may or may not have seen. If you haven't, I highly recommend going and checking it out, by Sir Ken Robinson. And it was called How Schools Kill Creativity. And
It's a classic. It's a great one.
it
Yeah.
really is, yeah. And it was one of those, you know, when you have those moments in your life where suddenly you see the world from a different perspective. That was what it was for me. And I suddenly realised that it wasn't me, it wasn't the kids, you know, it was just the whole system, the way the whole thing was laid out. We just focused on the wrong things, and we didn't give children enough space to learn lots of different stuff in their life. It was a very narrow curriculum. And so I think my interest in education kind of took off from there. I did a little investigation on what home education was like. First of all, homeschooling, but then I realised, like Jo mentioned, that I think home education was certainly fit me better. But also as my daughter grew up, and she was growing up at that point, I realised it would have suited her better as well. But I was still in this place where I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to make a mark in education, because I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. I'd been there and I thought, well, I could go in back into the classroom, I could train and go back into the classroom, but I just felt like I would probably get stifled quite quickly and have too much of my brain power used up for trying to keep the classroom running. So I launched a podcast called the Limitless podcast. And it was for change makers. It was for people who want to make an impact in the world in some way, and with a particular focus on the education space. And that's where, through that, I sort of started attending some education events and I met Jo. And I think in particular, I remember going to a festival with Jo at the Summerhill School in Suffolk, which is a sort of fairly famous democratic school in the UK that's been running for over 100 years. And we just had this conversation where we went, what are people needing? And how, we wanted to work together. We wanted to make an impact in some way, and we weren't quite sure how. And so, yeah, we sort of had a discussion, and Jo said in her Facebook group that she'd noticed a lot of people were coming in saying that they wanted to start up their own schools. So if you could go on to the next slide, Jo. That's when our sort of first thought came about doing the education startups group. So Jo has lots of excellent connections, and she said she knew a few people who were running their own. They were either small schools, sort of micro schools, or learning communities, or in some way some sort of progressive education communities. And so we ran our first webinar and got
Sorry,
60...
the slides keep moving.
No,
Is that
that's
the
okay.
right slide?
Yes,
Is
that's
that the
right.
right
Yeah.
one? Okay.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, so we ran our first webinar and got 60 people booked on, which was, far and away. We were expecting a handful, but loads of people came. They were asking lots and lots of questions. They obviously really wanted this knowledge and they really wanted to know that there were other people out there doing the same thing. So because it was really popular, we ended up continuing and running more webinars with more school founders and learning community founders. And then in November 2024, we launched our Education Startups online membership, which was basically a dedicated community space for people who are doing this work of starting up schools that are slightly outside the mainstream schooling environment. And one of the things that Jo and I always wanted to do was provide an option for anyone who is doing something different. So we have people in our membership who are interested in doing or are running everything from forest schools to sort of only 1 day a week, kind of very focused, tiny learning communities, to full-blown schools that with hundreds of students right the way up to 16 plus. To online schools. So we have like a bit of everything. And one of the things that we always said and that we love about the education startups work is that we're giving young people more choice, because at the end of the day, I think that's what we need. Young people are just forced into this one way of doing things in mainstream schools generally. I mean, you can pick your school, but you don't get a whole lot of difference within each school. And actually, everyone has different requirements. So that's what Education Startups has been. And the membership was about sharing that knowledge of all different types of schools and also providing a community space. Because certainly one of the things I found, and one of the things that Jo mentioned earlier that she found as well, is when you first start questioning the mainstream school environment, it kind of feels a bit lonely. And particularly if the people around you don't agree, they're just like, oh, well, this is just how things are, and they just get on with it. It just can feel really like, is it just me? Like, is there anyone else out there that feels this way? And I know that's, part of why Jo started up her progressive education space. And yeah, we just wanted to create this community space where if people were starting up their own schools, they could come and know that there are others in the same boat. And I know that's what your organisation, the Micro Schools Network, are doing as well. And I think, you know, the more of these community spaces that we can have, the better, really. So we've been running these webinars now for 3 years, and one of the things that we've been starting to do is kind of pull out those common threads that come out between all of the experts that talk to us. So that, again, this is over all of these different types of schools, different sizes, but there are certain things that come out in terms of if you are going to set up your own school, these are things that come out as a common thread of recommendations on things that you that will help you sort of make more of a success of it. So if we go on to the next one, Joe, yeah, the first one the sort of first thread that I would pull out is having a clear vision and a sort of set of guiding principles and values. And this has come out in practically every webinar we've run in some shape or form. Like sometimes it's like the leading topic, other times it just gets mentioned, but there's always somewhere where the founder will say, be absolutely sure and sort of crystal clear on what your vision is and what your values are. And I think the reason for this is because it kind of guides all of the other decisions that you make. So in terms of, you know, what sort of venue you pick, who else you work with, who's going to get attracted to your community and like join your community, how your days are going to be structured and what curriculum you're going to work with. All of that is sort of you refer back to your vision and your values to make those decisions. So that was sort of the first thing. And one of the sort of key things that comes out from this. And one of the things I was going to mention, actually, that I meant to mention on the previous slide, is that all of our webinars are very, because the community are people who are setting up their own schools, they tend to be very much led by them. So a lot of our webinars are, you know, the majority of them are questions to founders. So Joe and I don't necessarily really get involved very much. It's sort of over to the audience, as it were. So everything that's come out is things that people are really asking about, and yeah, questions that they're asking about. Yeah, so the vision and values means that you get the right people in, and they, you know, they will adjust over time as you go and as you sort of become more settled in your in the school or the learning space. But it's that core of why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, who's coming to join your community. And I thought earlier, like, how do you do this when it's so, there can be so many things that you want. And the way I thought of it is to sort of take just one child, and it might even be your child, and just describe what it is that they need or they need and want, essentially. And then you'll create a space that works for them and then works for other people or other children like them. Okay, next one. So the next thread that commonly comes out is about finding a team to work with. So a lot of the people who start up schools say it's incredibly hard work, kind of takes over your life, you know, and I think doing it on your own can be, well, I don't even know if it is possible really, but it's certainly extremely hard and can lead to burnout because you're having to sort of think about so much, unless you're talking about a really, really small, you know, if we're talking like a couple of pupils, but even then, you know, doing it with others is always easier and more fun. So yeah, one of the things that the founders always mention in some way, shape or form is who they're working with. So it might be sort of staff that's working with them, or possibly even volunteers who are doing the teaching, the facilitating kind of thing, like within the learning space. Or it could be that you're getting support on the sort of more admin business side of things, because at the end of the day, you have to run both a business and a school, a learning space as well. And one of the things that's useful to think about is what your strengths are and what gaps you need to fill. So if you're a trained teacher, then you might be really confident deciding how you're going to work with the children, but maybe not be so confident in how you then market it to get people turning up or manage the finances, that kind of thing, and vice versa. So yeah, getting a team around you is really helpful. And some of our founders have found these from all over the place. Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's volunteers, sometimes they pay staff, or sometimes they pay consultants to come in. So, you know, one of our school founders who opened a full-time Ofsted registered school paid an Ofsted inspector. So Ofsted is the inspection sort of overarching inspection organisation in the UK, and she bought in consultancy on that to make sure that when she launched and opened the school, she was meeting all the Ofsted criteria, so she knew that she would open and that it would pass the inspection basically. So yeah, thinking about kind of who you need to work with and what skills and gaps you need to fill. Okay, the next thread that comes through is your community. So this is your learners and your families that are joining your space. Finding the right families is really important. A lot of our founders say that they refer back to their values, and having that vision and the values really clear will really help you with this. They've talked sometimes about also, if you sort of, obviously when you start you have to get everyone together, but if you add too many new people, it can be really hard to keep that sort of community feeling going. So being aware of that and maybe adding people at a slower pace, you know. But this is something to think about in terms of who is going to be in your space. You know, is this going to be home educators or homeschoolers who just want somewhere to be in community with others, you know, almost like a bit more of a social space? Is it going to be something is this going to be like a well-being space for those students who just have burnt out of their other schooling options and they just need somewhere they you know, they can just relax and recuperate? Or is it going to be slightly more academic but with a bit more autonomy, or a wider variety of subjects? So thinking about, again, this goes back to your values and your vision again, thinking about the sort of community that you want and where to find them. And a lot of our experts said that they started, even if the vision was to have a large school or a full-time school, they often started smaller. So a lot of them started with, you know, a small group, maybe one day a week, and then slowly grew from there. And what that enabled is that space to sort of find your feet, make the mistakes that you're going to make, and sort of have a smaller space to be able to correct those before you start inviting others in. So don't be afraid to start small, basically. And then it's about thinking about how you're going to reach those people. So some of our founders were finding their community through home education groups, or sort of online groups where they've been talking to others, especially if it's an online school, obviously. Or we have founders who literally spent months before they launched literally just doing talks in the local community, in the local hall, where they just invited people along and they just did a talk once or twice a week to just tell people about their ethos for the school and what they wanted it to be. And also some of our community members liaise with local schools and the local education authorities, I don't know if this works in the same way in the US, but in the UK, we have these things called EHCPs, which is called an education and healthcare plan. And these are for students with special educational needs or who are struggling in some way to access mainstream schools. And so schools and local authorities sometimes need to find educational settings outside of a mainstream school through these educational healthcare plans.
Yeah,
So
we have them. They're IEPs. Yep. Oh, Siri just
yeah,
chimed in as well. Hmm.
individual, yeah, that's right. So um and I did actually do a brief little look on the internet earlier, and I think it's a similar thing. So these plans provide funding for students to attend an alternative school. So some of our founders have found that that's quite a good way to get into students who are in school already who need something alternative. And that can also be quite a good funding route as well. Um, so the next one is about curriculum. So within your learning space, or the learning spaces, sorry, from the experts and the founders, as I've mentioned before, there's a really wide variety of approaches. So some schools will run what looks like a pretty standard mainstream school. It will have lesson times, it will have play times, and it will have classrooms. But the way that young people get to engage with the learning will look really different. So they'll have an awful lot more autonomy over what they're learning and how. The teachers are often trained into sort of how to observe and work with the children rather than just teaching their knowledge and expecting them to soak it up. And also the way that decision making happens within the school can be really different as well. So there's another full school called the New School in London, and they have a sociocracy model in the way they make decisions, which means that all young people and staff have an equal say within the school and have the opportunity to feed into the decisions that are made within the school. So that can look very different. Some of our spaces are, you wouldn't recognise them as a school. You know, we have like forest school, we've had sort of experts speak who are basically forest schools, and the kids just are outdoors and running and learning in the outdoors. And you know, that might be very, very child-led, and very autonomous for them. So it's so dependent on the sort of space that you want to provide. And again, it comes back to the vision at the start. You know, all of it is valid. All of it is different requirements and different needs for different children. But it's important to kind of understand what you are providing. And one of the things that I remember one of our founders said was to make sure that people know what they're signing up for. Particularly parents, actually. I mean, obviously, it's important for the young people to know, but parents can have if they have the wrong idea of what they're signing up for, and then they don't feel like they're getting what they want for their children, that can just make it really tricky because you want it to work for your community, but also if if your vision is to have an outdoor space without anything that looks like a structured class, and your parents are expecting them to be getting maths and English classes, that's going to make conversations quite difficult. So yeah, it's just having a clear idea of what the students will be doing each day and then communicating that at the point that people sign up. Yeah, okay. And then the last thing I was going to mention is about adapting. So a lot of the founders that we've spoken to say that how they started is sometimes a bit different, but also sometimes very different to how they end up. And so it's understanding without moving away from your core set of values, how the community might need to adapt, because everyone needs to adapt to changing circumstances and to growing numbers, to growing ages. As they grow up, it might be that things need to change. So it's understanding like how you will adapt to those changes. We've mentioned a little bit about how you make decisions, like are the students going to be involved in those decisions? A lot of our founders do involve the children in the decisions on the community. It's like a whole community working together. And some of them even sort of involve the children in how to like taking on new staff and like hiring. And also thinking about how you'll involve the parents as well. Again, it's really different depending on the founders. Some people have the parents as they just see them as a sort of extra part of the community, but just they don't tend to be there every day. Others very much focus it on what the children want rather than what the parents want. So, but that might need to adjust and change over time. So thinking about how one of the things that our experts do is like build in the time and the space to kind of check in with everyone and see what needs to change. So it might happen through those meetings like Joe showed earlier, where everyone gets to like feed in on what's working well and then maybe what isn't working so well and what they'd like to change. Yes, and as I mentioned, always checking in with your original values is a good way to go. So that was the last thing I kind of pulled out, but there were a couple of questions that got submitted that Whitney kindly forwarded on to me. And so I thought it might be worth just mentioning a couple of those as well. So one of the questions was about locations, like about literally where you'd open your school. And I mean, you might have gathered from what I've said so far, but the locations are really varied. So some of our founders literally find a space in a woodland somewhere, and that is their school. Some have completely their own building, so they manage to gather the funds to actually purchase their own building, and that becomes their school. A lot of them work out of small community venues, so that might be sort of village halls that they can rent, or possibly even schools like outside of school hours, or sort of old schools that aren't used anymore, like sort of halls that are on the side of those. I think we've got one founder who rented an office block, a couple of floors of an office block. So it's really varied. And yeah, they've also found them in very different ways. But one of the things that I remember one of our founders was saying is that they actually asked their local education authority, because the other thing that the local education authority will be aware of is what spaces are you can actually use for schools or for education purposes. So in some cases you need to sort of just be aware of, I don't know much about this personally, but I know a few of them mentioned they had to kind of change the I can't remember the term for it now, but where you have to change like how a building is used. So yeah, that was something to be aware of. And there was a couple of questions that came in around sort of like the requirements for opening a school, and sort of laws around schooling. And they mentioned Europe as a whole. So Joe and I, our education startups group is international. So we can invite people from wherever, all over the world. But we're sort of mostly in the UK. We have a couple of people from Europe in there as well. And the thing I would say, it might be the same in the US with the States as well, is it's really different in every country. So as an example, the UK, as we mentioned with home education, is at the moment fairly free and open. So you can you can home educate your child and send them to a small part-time community, and that kind of and that's fine. You can just choose to do that. Whereas other countries in Europe, so for instance, Germany, is very restrictive on how you can't home educate your child in Germany. It's illegal to do that. And so opening up alternative schools can be a bit more challenging if it's like a small school that you want to do, so part-time can be a bit more challenging. But there are democratic schools in Germany and in other European countries as well. Um,
Well, Alex,
yeah.
with that, I'm curious. I mean, how are they offering supplementary programs if homeschooling isn't allowed? Or I suppose they've started communities based on the own maybe regional requirements that they found loopholes and things. Because also many places in Europe don't allow homeschooling, and that was that I've heard from
Mm.
other founders. They said, if I know a country allows homeschooling, then I can start to investigate what an alternative learning community looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we've got one of our community is from Germany, and he said he's he has struggled to find anything that looks a bit alternative or progressive in Germany. I know they do exist, but basically the message in Germany is all children need to go to school. And I think they do have like special schools, like special educational needs schools, that kind of thing. So they do like try and offer different options. But essentially, from what he was saying, all children are expected to be in full-time school, and that's just it.
Hmm.
But I know that other countries in Europe aren't quite as strict as that. So there's I think Spain. There's a founder that we spoke to from Spain who they started up a school called Learn Life, who
Yeah, we had someone
very
from Learn
inspiring.
Life a
Oh,
few
did you?
months ago. Yeah, Devin was
Yeah.
speaking. Hmm.
Fantastic. Yeah, yeah, Devon. Yeah, so very inspiring. I love Learn Life. And they have a few schools in Spain. And interestingly, they've been trying to encourage others to set up schools in other countries. And they tried to set one up in Germany. And he was saying they had to, in the end, make it a Learn Life like college, so 16 plus, because the German education policies meant they wouldn't be able to run Learn Life as it is in Spain in Germany. Um, so it's really different depending on where you set up. But as Joe mentioned earlier, like the UK, there is flexibility. There are certain ways that you have to work to sort of. So basically, in the UK, you are either a full-time school, which means that you have to register with Ofsted, which is the registration organisation, and then you
It's
get this.
England, I think,
Oh, okay.
specifically for England. I think
Yeah.
there's a different inspectorate in Wales and
Oh, you're right.
Scotland.
Yeah, that's right. Um, and yeah, and so they will sort of approve you as a school essentially, and then come back and do regular inspections. If you're a part-time school, which is a little bit of a grey area on what a part-time school looks like, but
You
most
can't call
people,
yourself a school though if you're
no,
part-time.
no, that's right, because otherwise you Ofsted come knocking at your door anyway. So if you run a setting that's under 15 hours a week, then you don't have to register as a school. You can just be a community. Um, but I think in England that is might change in the future because of this legislation coming through Parliament. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it. Um, and was there anything else? Oh, the only other question
Don't
that
want me
came.
to decide on.
Yes, the only other question came through, actually, the good timing, would be how to approach and build connections with the micro school community in the UK. So, my number one recommendation for that would be to join Joe's Facebook group, because there's 11,000 people in there and I know there are many of them that are interested in sort of progressive schools, but also um, you can come and sort of join our education startups group or get some tips on our sort of startups, from startups. So our 5 top tips on how to set up a school or learning community are again from founders. So it's from people who've been there and done it, and they've shared their way of doing things, and their guide on there. So feel free to go and download that, and then you can go on our mailing list and you can hear about all of our events and the things that are going on in our group. Or you can actually come and join the online membership community and meet other founders there, and attend the webinars. So I think that was me done for the presentation. I'm just going to have a little check in the chat, but if anyone would like to ask questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat, or you can unmute and ask questions, and yeah, Joe and I will endeavour to answer them.
Yeah, it looks
Yeah.
like Mary Grace maybe has a question.
Hi. I
Hi,
was
Mary
wondering,
Grace.
hi. I was wondering how the money worked. Like, do you have to be a nonprofit in the UK?
Mm.
Do parents pay for, how does the money work?
Yeah, so I would say there's quite a lot of flexibility. So of the founders that we've had, there are some that are set up as charities. There are some that are set up as CICs, community interest corporation companies. Thank you. Some are literally just profit-making businesses. So it's a real range. And then in terms of how they're funded, I think there's probably 3 main ways that they do it. Predominantly, it is often parents pay. Unfortunately, for many, that is just how it is. They just have to do that.
Because they don't get any government funding. If you want to do
No,
something a bit different with a different ideology, you won't get any government funding.
no,
So
it's very
sadly, they
difficult
Right.
to
do
do that.
charge fees. But often they will have a sliding scale of fees, won't they? And
Yeah,
means
they do. I
testing.
mean, a lot of the founders we speak, most of the, in fact, I'd say all the founders we speak to, they all say, I really wish I didn't have to charge fees. Um, the other way is through the EHCPs, like I mentioned earlier. So if a student has an educational healthcare plan
Mm,
and a mainstream school can't provide what they need, they then
mm,
have to use the government funding that they would give to that student in another way, and that can be by paying to a community. And in fact, some of our smaller learning communities um, essentially bolster their costs with those EHCP funded students so that they can charge parents, so private tuition, less. So you can kind of balance it up, or to offer sort of subsidies or that kind of thing. And then the other way is just through essentially philanthropic funding. So finding a nice rich person who wants to do something good in the world, or through their own sort of funding, really. Um, there are It's very difficult to get funding for educational stuff through charity work, or through, sorry, charity grants. Some of them do it, but it's hard, because basically I think the approach is, well, the government should be covering that. So it can be tricky to get grants and funding as a charity. But again, we have had 1 or 2 who do use charity sort of fundraising to try and.
I think they have to use that for like a specific project, don't they? Like if it's like an environmental or sustainability project, rather than funding the whole thing, like you couldn't use it to fund salaries or anything like that.
Yeah.
Sounds very much the same as in the US.
Is it? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Siri had a question about which percentages are new school founders that are current parents looking for alternatives for their own children.
Yeah, that's
Any
interesting. I'm just
idea?
trying to think
Yeah.
now. I would say um, quite a few. Certainly the members in our community, there are many who are parents who are basically same as Joe went through. They know that it's not working, and they just want to do they just want to do something else for their own children. Um, So I would say I don't know, Joe. Do you
I'm not
get a
sure.
sense of
I'm
how
not
many there
sure
are?
it's the majority, but at
No.
least half, would you say?
Yeah, I would
I
say
used
that.
to think it was mainly parents doing this, but
Mm,
actually recently we've got former teachers joining.
yeah.
So I think it's a whole range. We do have a lot of disillusioned teachers that have left the system and they've seen
Mm,
it's broken, they want to do something different.
yeah.
But yeah, either parents or teachers, I'd say,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Absolutely.
special educational needs coordinators.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
oh, I can see Nicholas has got a question. What role do you envision for AI learning models in alternative schools? Do you know what? It's really interesting actually because I've been well, I don't know how you could avoid looking at AI. And there's surprisingly little discussion around AI for in our communities and with the founders that we've spoken to. Um, but I have heard of some schools looking to use AI to essentially guide and facilitate student learning essentially. Um, with the human interaction being the bit where they are providing the resources and making sure that the students are going in the right direction and that sort of thing, but the AI is tailoring it to what they're doing. And I think when you say sort of like what role do you envision for AI, I think I'd like to think that's where it would go, is that it can provide something extremely tailored, which is just something that you can't do at the scale that we're providing education now. Um, and with the number of, the costs of the number of staff that's involved and that kind of thing. Um, what I what what I'm concerned about is that people will try to use AI to essentially replace the human element,
Mm.
which I just I think AI definitely has a place in making things very personalized, but in terms of providing connection and support and relationship, like there's nothing that, well, in my mind, that's where it makes most sense to have the human connection, is like understanding, well, okay, this child might be progressing, but are they happy? Are they doing what they want with their lives? Do they actually know and understand what they're learning? That kind of thing. So,
Alex, I can add in here because
oh
I
yeah,
had the experience. Hi, Rashmi here.
hi.
I had the experience of teaching kids like for like in school as a group of like 30 kids in one class, and then being able to teach, like you said, not a traditional, but not like it's structured to meet the government structured needs, right? So after
Mm,
that, I got the opportunity to teach online. And then there was an experiment project that was going on for like AI teaching to the kids, like full-fledged AI. We were
yeah.
there as a teacher to like just observe that whether AI is actually doing it correctly, if this it
Hmm.
needs some kind of rectification. So what we could see for almost 8 months, this experiment was for almost 8 months with different micro schools. There were different micro schools with different caliber of kids, with different age group of kids.
Hmm.
Initially, AI is good when it is working in the back end with support.
Yeah.
But when AI was in front, initially kids were super excited, like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, like I can do whatever I'm gonna do.
This
You
is really
talk to
cool.
AI,
Yeah.
it just talk to. But let me tell you, like almost like 2 months and 2.5 months, we could see decline in trust in like talking to AI because it's just always gonna be same positive tone in the same way.
Mm,
It cannot super personalize with respect to okay Rashmi's last conversation or last mood, but the
yeah.
teacher knows. So
Yeah.
gradually that entire full AI system also had to like transition into a hybrid mode because they
Really.
needed teachers to enter. So that's where I feel like we are kind of safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel like anything where that connection on a very human level is important, and teaching is, and like all learning spaces are really are, because it's not just about, I think, I think this is kind of where mainstream kind of went wrong, is that thinking that it was all about, we've got a whole load of knowledge and we need those kids to just soak up that knowledge and
Dump
then
in it.
take it away.
Yeah.
And it's not all about that. So I'm heartened to hear this, Rashmi, actually.
Agreed,
Oh, I
agreed.
was scared. I was nervous.
Yeah, I
Like,
bet.
I'm teacher, and I was like, what is going on? Like, then how do we know what the kids are talking and what they are
Mm,
doing? But we could see that they started missing that personal touch, teacher coming and joking about something,
yeah,
maybe asking how the day was, and being able to share their day with the kids before you actually start with the topic, right? So
absolutely.
those things are building the connection, and you start building a trust. You could see the person who I'm talking to. So
Mm,
then we could see, as a teacher, our productivity was better because the AI was actually helping me as a teacher to select the question based on the performance of the child. But when it comes to engaging and explaining, I was there present. So
yeah.
as a teacher, I could monitor that, yes, the learner has got the understanding. Otherwise, what was happening, like we could see in the back end, kids don't know that we are actually watching what's going on. It was under supervision. So what they'll do, they have four options, okay? And they have to like choose one based on
Mm,
the understanding of the question. What they'll do is they'll pick one. Oh, this is not correct. Let's try the second one. Let's try the third one. Ultimately, fourth one is right. So, so there was no way to understand whether really it was the answers that is being presented. Is it coming out of understanding or is just a guess?
mm,
So
Yeah.
in teaching, AI is always going to be our assistant and like
yeah,
helping the parents and the teachers, but explaining at the personal level, that is right now I could say that
yeah,
it's not
yeah,
going to happen.
We're
yeah, yeah.
safe. We're all safe. The
Yes.
humans are still
Yeah.
in charge.
Yay.
Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you so much. If you guys are okay, I'll be sharing your details, your emails um, I'll send out a recording tomorrow, so I can include Joe and Alex's details if you're all right with that.
Yeah,
And
perfect.
and you can also reach out to them directly or get in contact with their different orgs. And I also wanted to let everyone know that we're celebrating Micro Schools Week, the last week of April into the beginning of May. And so we invite everyone to join along. There's different events that'll be happening, PR. We're just really trying to amplify what alternative models look like all around the globe. So it's a really easy way to celebrate and get to know about this and help parents and other people know. So thank you so much, Alex and Joe. What a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Whitney.
Yay.
Thanks,
Keep
everyone.
in touch.
Bye.
All right,
Cheers.
take
Bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.